Hi, my name is Valerie, and I'm really excited because this is the first year I'm going to be able to plant an outdoor vegetable garden. Today is April 30th, 2020, and I am starting my planning stages. I know what the location is going to be like. It's going to be long and skinny, but I have to figure out how much space I need for the number of seeds in my seed packets. So I opened up my seed packets and I counted all the seeds inside, and I wrote the number of seeds in green on each packet so I'd be able to find it again later. Now I can figure out how much space each seed needs by going to a website that will help you plan out your garden. I decided to choose Gardener Supply Company, where they have a design your row or bed, which is pretty nice because I am a very visual person. I can't really visualize things in my head. I need to see it on paper first. So you're able to select the width and the length of your bed, and they show a little grid. And I think I want my rows to be 8 foot long, so let's go with 8 squares. But I also know that in real life I want my beds to be 2.5 feet wide. So let's just choose 2 and see how that does. So I know that I have 3 kinds of beans and 2 kinds of peas, but let's see what kind of icons we can find first. It looks like when you put an icon onto the little grid, it brings up information about it to help you plant it, and it even tells you that you need 6 to 8 plants per square foot for pole beans. And that's actually pretty neat because that tells me that this is square foot gardening, and that what I go to put on this grid is comparable to what I'd be able to do in real life. Let's see if we can find some peas. Oh, there we go. That's kind of neat. Oh wow, look, that made a lot of little pea icons in the square, which means that you can plant more peas in 1 square foot than you can with beans. They have some interesting information. You can put 9 to 16 plants per square foot. That's pretty interesting. So I think in general I would do 2 bean plants in a row if I decided to plant everything in 1 straight row, and then I'd be able to put 3 pea plants. Now I know I have 2 different varieties of peas and 3 different varieties of beans, so that's pretty interesting. In an 8 foot long row, I could do 1 square foot of peas and then 3 of the different beans. And the nice thing about this is you can then move your little icons around, which helps because I change my mind a lot when I'm planning things out. Some other plants that I started some tomatoes and peppers back at the end of February. So I'll be able to put some of those icons in here too. I have 3 plants of each, so I'll be able to actually fit all of them in 1 bed if I wanted to. Maybe I want to space them out a little bit. That way I could add other things in if I wanted to, like lettuce. It seems you can't drag and drop icons to make them disappear, so I wonder if I could put them back onto their original icon and make them disappear. Let's try that with the peppers. Oh, it worked. Good. And I'm not worried about not having all my icons in there because I will be having 2 separate rows. So I can put some in the other row too. And looking down through our information, we can actually see that the peppers and the tomatoes both have 1 plant per square foot. That will help them to get nice and bushy. So after completing your bed, you can save your row and you can give it the name that you want, and then it uses your email and your zip code in order to be able to keep track of which one is yours. And then you can even put a little note about it if you want to. I decided to name mine Bean Garden. And then you go to design your site plan, and then you can choose the width and the length of the space that your garden is going to be in. And that will help you so that you can figure out exactly where your gardens are going to fit in, and you can figure out what orientation you want things to be. And then you would choose load a saved row or bed, and you'd put in your email address, and then you can pick out your garden. Now I chose a 10 by 15 grid because I thought my rows are kind of long and skinny. Let's see how that goes. Now I know I want my rows to be about 3 feet apart, so that gives me room if I have to put a wheelbarrow in there that I can turn around. I don't think that I'll be able to fit all of my bean seeds into just 2 rows, so I'm going to add some more to make them longer. And I think I need to make my grid a bit longer so that I can see everything. That looks pretty good. And then if you scroll down, you can see the names of all the beds that you have. And then I went to my calculator and I found that I can fit about 118 plants in 1 row into a 8-foot long bed. So if I multiply that by 4 beds, that's 472 plants. And then I counted up all the numbers on my seed packets, and I found I have 485 seeds, which is pretty close. It's only a little bit over the number 472, which means I can save a few seeds and replant them as needed. And then I went to a volume calculator, and I said for 16-foot long bed, that's 2.5 feet wide with maybe about 6 inches high of compost, that would be about 20 cubed feet of compost that I would have to get. And if I did 2 rows that are 16 feet long, I would end up with 40 cubed feet of compost. Well, I did some calling on the phone, and it turns out that the location that I wanted to put my garden wasn't accessible to me after all. I wanted to put it along a stream bank, but it turns out the entire 50 feet from where the edge of the stream is protected. So I ended up deciding to move my garden into a little apple orchard. It's pretty much just 2 rows of like 6 trees. But the trees are close enough together that I'm worried that if I go to till into the ground, I'll have surface roots that will get in the way and I won't be able to do as much tilling as I want. So I looked into some other options. I looked into raised beds, which is everybody's #1 thought, but I also kind of looked into straw bales. And I decided not to go with straw bales because it takes 3 weeks to condition the straw bales with ammonia so that it starts breaking down and you can actually plant in it. I have to leave in 2 weeks. Actually now it's more like 1 week. So I ended up deciding not to go with straw bales. and decided to go with a raised bed instead. So I looked into lumber that you could use. Most people do an 8x4, so 8 foot long, 4 feet wide. But I still wanted to go with the 2 feet wide. That way I can fit more individual beds into the space that I want. So I was thinking, if you have a 2x8 bed, then you can get a 10 foot long board that is 2 inches by 6 inches, which is what everybody seems to use for their raised beds. In total, I want to have 4 beds, and the idea is if you make it 2 boards high, that would mean per bed you have to have 4 boards, which you can then cut and put together. I looked on the Lowe's website and found that if I bought 16 boards of 10 foot long fir lumber, it was about $6.77 per board, and the total would have been $108.32. Now you think, oh, that's a good chunk of change. Well, I also looked into Home Depot, and they have 8 foot boards at $5.68 per board. And if I was going to do that, I'd have to have 5 boards per bed, which would mean I would need 20 boards total. And that would end up being $113.60. So even though the dollar per board is cheaper, because I'd have to end up buying more boards, it would have cost me a lot more. So I decided to start out with 4 boards, because I'm thinking if I make my beds 1 board high, I can just kind of till whatever I can, and then I can just put compost on top of it. And you really only need 1 board to hold your compost in place. Now the next thing I have to tackle is getting a bunch of down apple trees out of the way. They were cut down and they are dead. And then I also have to figure out how I'm going to get all the weeds out of the way so that I can put my boards in place, do my tilling with a garden fork, and then I have to figure out how to get compost from the location they're selling it to my garden bed. In the meantime, I had some down branches and I trimmed them so that I had a bunch of long pieces. All of the short and really spindly pieces I ended up putting off to the side in a little pile on their own, and those will probably end up becoming compost at some point. The longest branches are about 10 feet long, and they were probably what you would call the center of the branches that held up all the smaller pieces. And I decided to use those branches as fence posts for my bean fence. My dad came and he brought his weed whacker with him, and he cut down all of the weeds that were in the immediate area that I wanted to put my raised beds. He then helped my husband and I flip the sod for 2 beds, build the frames, and put weed fabric around the edges of the frames so that we would have a clear space to walk around for the entire season. In order to make my frames, I cut my 2 foot long pieces off the end of my 10 foot boards in order to make 2 foot long pieces and 8 foot long pieces. We put them together in a rectangle, and we used some small pieces of 2x4 in order to reinforce the corners. After putting all of that together and putting down the weed fabric, I found a bunch of flat stones and I started lining them up around the edge of the fabric to help keep it down so that the wind didn't end up picking it up. It turns out that the fabric staples, or landscape staples, when they're new, they're very shiny, but they're also very smooth and they don't like to stay in the ground very well. At this point, I still didn't have any compost yet, but I did need to put in some of the larger plants that I had. So I took the opportunity to bury those in the ground. They were very large plants. They were some tall tomatoes and some bell peppers. And I did put in a couple squashes in the corners with a little bit of compost that I had, but it wasn't enough to fill the entire bed. On one end of each bed, we put a fence post stick so that it would be buried in the ground and ready for string when we finished the entire thing. We ended up finding compost that was horse manure from a nearby farm, and we rented a dump trailer from Home Depot in order to be able to get it from the farm to the property so I could put it in the raised beds. I was able to fill up the raised beds almost all of the way, and I figured that that was good enough for planting seeds. I even was able to string all of the fence posts together once I got all 5 of the posts up. The fourth bed, the very last one, ended up having a fence post on both sides of the bed in order to keep equal distancing and not let the string get droopy. Now my peas and my beans will have something to climb up, and I'm very excited. So of course, after all of that work, I was able to just plant all of my seeds. I planted 2 types of peas. I planted cow peas. I planted lima beans and green beans down the middle. I ended up having way too many seeds for the amount of space, so I just kept making like row after row. There ended up being 7 or 8 rows of just peas or just beans that were right next to each other just because I didn't have enough spacing. So maybe next year I'll only plant half the amount. I also planted some pumpkin seeds, some sunflower seeds, marigold seeds, and a lot of lettuce seeds because I didn't know what else to put in there. Hopefully my husband likes lettuce. I can't wait to see everything as it grows and fills out the space.